You're useless. The words echoed through the great hall. For one endless heartbeat, no one breathed. Hundreds of alphas, elders, generals, and noble families sat frozen around the council chamber, their eyes shifting from the Alpha King to the woman standing quietly beside the royal table. Luna Celine Ashvale didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked at her husband. Alpha King Darian Blackwood wasn't even looking at her anymore. He rubbed a hand across his tired face, exhausted after hours of heated debate. "Enough," he said impatiently. "I've listened to enough interruptions for one evening." The silence grew heavier. Lady Marissa Thornbrook, daughter of one of the wealthiest alpha families in the kingdom, slowly lowered the scroll she had been presenting. A satisfied smile touched her lips. Around the council table, several nobles avoided meeting Celine's eyes. Others didn't bother hiding their amusement. Only moments earlier, Marissa had proudly unveiled a new grain distribution plan for the coming winter. The elders had applauded. "The northern packs will survive the cold because of this plan," one elder had declared. Several ministers immediately agreed. Only Celine had noticed the fatal mistake. She hadn't interrupted. She had simply waited until the applause faded. Then, in her usual gentle voice, she'd said, "Your Majesty, if I may." Darian had nodded absently, still studying the reports spread before him. Celine pointed to the map. The western mountain roads, close after the second snowfall. And she traced the route with one finger. "If the grain follows this path." She looked around the chamber. Half the western villages won't receive supplies before spring. A few ministers frowned. Several began checking their maps. Before anyone could answer, Marissa laughed. So the Luna finally decided to contribute. A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the hall. Marissa folded her arms. Perhaps Her Majesty should leave transportation to people who understand logistics. Celine remained calm. "I only meant that." "Enough." Darian's voice cut through hers. He looked up at last. His patience had already been worn thin by border disputes, treasury shortages, and arguments that had stretched well into the night. At that moment, he saw only another disagreement delaying the meeting. He never noticed the concern in his wife's eyes. He never looked at the map she was holding. He simply said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You're useless." Silence crashed over the room. Even Marissa's smile disappeared. Captain Rowan, standing near the throne, stared at his king in disbelief. The chief steward quietly lowered his head. The royal scribe stopped writing. Celine stood perfectly still. Then, something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not a bitter smile, not an angry one. A peaceful smile. The kind a person wears after finally accepting something they had hoped wasn't true. "I understand." Her voice was soft enough that everyone leaned forward to hear it. She carefully gathered the scattered reports from the table, straightened the council ledgers she had organized before the meeting, placed fresh ink beside the royal scribe. Even now, she was thinking about making someone else's work easier. Finally, she bowed gracefully to the council. "Please continue." Without another word, Luna Celine walked toward the great doors. No one stopped her. No one followed her. Behind her, the debate slowly resumed. No one realized that the woman who had quietly held the kingdom together had just walked away, or that before the next sunrise, the Luna would be gone. The palace had never felt so quiet. Celine closed the doors to the Luna wing behind her and leaned against them for a long moment. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She touched her cheek. Dry. No tears. She had cried enough over the years. Tonight, there was only peace. She crossed the room slowly, looking at the life she had built. the bookshelf Darian had carved for her during the first year of their marriage. The vase of winter roses she replaced every Monday because he liked fresh flowers in the room, even if he rarely noticed them. The desk covered with ledgers, village accounts, trade agreements, letters from widows asking for help, requests from orphanages, reports from healers. Most of them had never reached the royal council, because she solved the problems before anyone else realized they existed, quietly, without asking for praise. She sat at the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside rested a folded parchment sealed with the royal healer's crest. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal once more. Royal Medical Record patient, Luna Celine, Blackwood condition, 12 weeks pregnant, expected birth, twins. A small smile touched her lips. "My little wolves," she whispered, resting a hand over her stomach. "I was going to tell your father tonight." She had imagined the moment countless times. After the winter assembly, when they were finally alone, she thought perhaps the news would remind them of the happiness they had once shared. Instead, he had called her useless, before the entire kingdom. She folded the report carefully and slipped it into a leather satchel. Then she began packing. Not much. A few simple dresses from before her marriage, her mother's wool shawl, a wooden wolf her father had carved when she was a little girl, her favorite book of herbs and healing. Everything else remained: the Luna crown, emerald necklaces, golden bracelets, silk gowns embroidered with the royal crest. None of those things belonged to Celine. They belonged to the palace. She walked to the writing desk and picked up a fresh sheet of parchment. The words came surprisingly easily. "Darian, tonight, you said something that finally answered a question I have been asking myself for years. If I truly have so little value in your eyes, then my leaving should make your burdens lighter. A useless Luna should never become a burden to her king. I hope your future is peaceful, Celine." She folded the letter, then hesitated. For one brief moment, her hand drifted toward the healer's report. Should she leave it? Should he know? Tears finally blurred her vision. "No," she whispered. "If he searches for me, it should be because he misses his wife, not because of the children." She tucked the report back into her satchel. Just before dawn, while snow drifted silently across the palace gardens, Celine wrapped herself in a plain traveling cloak. The servants' gate stood unguarded at this hour. She paused only once, not to look back, but to whisper a quiet goodbye to the life she had spent years trying to save. Then she disappeared into the falling snow. Hours later, the first maid entered the Luna wing carrying fresh flowers. The vase was empty. The wardrobe stood open, the bed was neatly made, and resting on the pillow was a single sealed letter addressed to the Alpha King. Darian didn't notice Celine's absence at breakfast. That wasn't unusual. After difficult council meetings, she often visited the palace gardens before sunrise. He assumed she needed time alone. By midday, he was buried beneath petitions from border commanders and trade ministers. Whenever a document required information he couldn't immediately find, he frowned. "Where's the grain inventory from the eastern province?" A young secretary searched through a stack of ledgers. I thought Her Majesty had them." Darian waved a dismissive hand. "Then ask her." The secretary hurried away. He returned 20 minutes later, pale-faced. "Your Majesty, the Luna isn't in her office." Darian barely looked up. "Try the library." Another hour passed. The chief steward appeared at the study door. His usually composed expression had cracked. "We've searched the library, the gardens, the chapel, the kitchens." He hesitated. "The Luna wing." Something in his voice made Darian set down his pen. "What about it?" "It's empty." For the first time that day, Unease stirred in his chest. He crossed the palace in long strides, the steward struggling to keep pace behind him. The doors to the Luna wing stood open. Inside, silence. The room felt strangely unfamiliar. The shelves that once held Celine's books were bare. The embroidery frame beside the window had been packed away. Even the fresh flowers she always kept on the table were gone. Only one thing remained. A folded letter resting neatly on the bed. His name was written across the front. He opened it. Read it once, then again. Each word struck harder than the last. A useless Luna should never become a burden to her king. His grip tightened until the parchment crumpled in his hand. "No," he whispered. "This isn't happening." The chief steward quietly cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, there are matters you should know." Darian looked up. The old steward bowed his head. For the past 6 years, Her Majesty personally reviewed every village account before it reached the treasury. He placed a heavy ledger on the table. She also negotiated next month's peace agreement with the Eastern Pax. Another steward entered, carrying 3 more ledgers. She organized winter food deliveries. A third steward stepped forward. She arranged relief for flood victims in the Southern Valley. More officials gathered in the doorway, each carrying another responsibility Celine had quietly managed. Darian stared at the growing pile of records. He had known she worked hard. He had never realized how much of the kingdom rested quietly on her shoulders. A hesitant knock interrupted the silence. The royal physician entered. His face was unusually grave. "Your Majesty, I've searched for Her Majesty as well." Darian looked at him hopefully. "Did you find her?" The physician slowly shook his head. "No, but there's something you deserve to know." He held out a sealed parchment. "I intended to give this to Her Majesty after the assembly." Darian broke the seal. His eyes scanned the first line, then froze. Royal Medical Record patient, Luna Celine Blackwood condition, 12 weeks pregnant, twin pregnancy progressing normally. The parchment slipped from his fingers. It drifted to the floor. The room fell completely silent. His knees nearly gave way. 12 weeks. The physician lowered his eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty." Darian pressed a trembling hand against his forehead. Last night, his wife had stood before the entire kingdom carrying their children, and he had called her useless. He looked toward the open doorway, as if expecting Celine to walk back through it. She didn't. Instead, he turned to Captain Rowan, his voice rough with panic. "Seal every gate. Search every road. Find my Luna." His voice broke. "Before I lose my children too." 6 months passed. Winter surrendered to spring. Spring gave way to the warmth of early summer. Yet every search party returned with the same answer: nothing. The Alpha King doubled the reward. Scouts searched every neighboring kingdom. Messengers carried Celine's portrait to distant packs. No trace. But stories began to travel farther than soldiers ever could. Merchants, returning from the eastern highlands, spoke of a woman known only as the Mountain Luna. "She healed my son's broken arm," one trader said. "She built a school where an abandoned mill used to stand," another added. "No child sleeps hungry in her valley," an elderly shepherd claimed. "They say even injured wolves wander to her doorstep." Each story tugged at something inside Darian. Finally, unable to ignore them any longer, he left the capital with only Captain Rowan and 2 guards. The journey into the eastern mountains took 4 days. The road narrowed into winding paths lined with pine trees and wildflowers. Small cottages appeared between the hills. Children laughed beside a sparkling stream. Women baked bread in outdoor ovens while elderly men repaired fences together. It didn't look like a forgotten valley. It looked peaceful. As Darian rode farther into the village, People greeted one another with easy smiles. No one bowed. No one looked afraid. Then he saw her. Celine stood beneath an old apple tree, sleeves rolled to her elbows, teaching a little girl how to bandage a scraped knee. A basket of herbs rested at her feet. Several children surrounded her, talking all at once. She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in years. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Captain Rowan quietly cleared his throat. "Your Majesty." Darian barely heard him. His eyes remained fixed on Celine. Her pregnancy was unmistakable now. The gentle curve beneath her simple blue dress stole the strength from his legs. Their daughters, safe, alive. One little boy tugged on Celine's sleeve. "Teacher, can you read us another story later?" She smiled warmly. "After everyone finishes helping in the garden." The children cheered. Only then did she look up. Her smile faded into quiet surprise. Their eyes met across the orchard. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The children noticed first. "Miss Celine?" The little girl holding the bandage looked between them. "Do you know him?" Celine answered softly. "Yes." The single word carried years of love and heartbreak. She thanked the children and asked them to continue watering the garden. When they wandered away, Darian finally stepped forward. "You look well. So do you." An awkward silence settled between them. He noticed how healthy she looked. Her cheeks held color again. The shadows beneath her eyes were gone. She no longer carried the quiet exhaustion he had mistaken for ordinary life. Here, she looked at peace. Darian glanced around the valley. "You've built something remarkable." She looked toward the children laughing near the stream. "We built it together." There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. He swallowed hard. "I searched everywhere." "I know." "You knew?" She nodded. The merchants talk. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, Darian gathered the courage he had rehearsed every night for 6 months. He looked directly into her eyes. "I've come," his voice faltered, "to bring you home." Celine rested one protective hand over her unborn daughters. Then she gave him the same calm smile she had worn the night she walked out of the great hall. "I'm already home." The words settled between them like falling snow. "I'm already home." Darian had imagined this reunion 1,000 different ways. In every version, Celine cried, or shouted, or demanded answers. He had prepared himself for anger. He had not prepared himself for peace. He looked around the valley again. Children raced through the orchard with baskets of apples. An elderly woman waved to Celine from a nearby garden. A young wolf limped toward her, and she instinctively bent to examine its injured paw. Everyone here needed her, and unlike the palace, they made sure she knew it. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Darian said quietly, "but please, come back with me." Celine finished wrapping the wolf's paw before answering. "I can't." He stepped closer. "The palace is your home." She looked at him with gentle sadness. "No, the palace was where I lived." She placed a hand over her heart. "This is where I finally learned to breathe again." The words struck deeper than any accusation. Darian lowered his gaze. "I was wrong. I know. I hurt you." "You did. I've regretted it every day." She nodded softly. "I believe you." He looked up, surprised. "You do?" "I believe you're sorry." A faint breeze stirred the branches overhead. "But being sorry doesn't erase what happened." She met his eyes. "When you called me useless, it wasn't only the word. It was that no one defended me. Not my king, not the council, not even the people I'd spent years helping." Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. "I realized I had been fighting for a place where I was already invisible." Darian closed his eyes. Every sentence was true. I can change. I hope you do. For us. She smiled sadly. For yourself. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Celine reached for his hand. His heart leaped. Then she gently placed his palm against the curve of her stomach. At first, nothing happened. Then, a tiny flutter. Another. One of the babies kicked. Darian froze. His breath caught. A second kick followed. His knees nearly gave way. Our daughters? His voice broke. Celine watched quietly as tears filled his eyes. He had faced wars, defeated rival alphas, negotiated impossible treaties. Yet the smallest movement beneath her heartbeat shattered him completely. They're real, she smiled. They've always been real. He swallowed hard. I almost never met them. No. You almost never knew they existed. The truth hurt even more. He looked at his hand, still resting against her stomach, then slowly withdrew it. I won't ask you to come back. She searched his face, surprised. You won't? No. He drew a deep breath. If I have to choose between bringing you to the palace, he looked around the peaceful valley, or knowing our daughters grow up loved, I choose them. For the first time since he arrived, something softened in Celine's eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet. Respect. Darian nodded once, then turned toward Captain Rowan. Find me a place to stay. The captain blinked. Your Majesty? A cottage. Here. Rowan looked stunned. In the valley? Yes. Darian glanced back at Celine. I'm not here to convince my family to leave. He offered her a small, humble smile. I'm here to become the kind of man they might one day choose to stay for. Celine watched him walk away. For the first time in years, he had made a promise without asking anything in return. By the end of the week, the Alpha King was living in the smallest cottage in the valley. The villagers didn't know what to make of it. He'll leave by next Monday, one farmer predicted. He won't survive a single mountain winter. Another laughed. Old Mrs. Willow simply smiled. We'll see. Darian heard every whisper. He answered none of them. Instead, he went to work. The first barn roof he tried to repair collapsed before noon. The elderly farmer standing below sighed dramatically. Your Majesty, I've built better. I believe you. But not today. Even Darian laughed. By the second week, he had learned the difference between cedar and pine. By the third, he could mend a broken fence without asking for help. By the end of the month, the villagers stopped staring every time the king carried lumber through the square. He became simply Darian. Every morning he joined the farmers before sunrise. Every afternoon he delivered food to families living in the higher mountain passes. Every evening he sat with elderly villagers, listening to stories instead of giving speeches. For the first time in his life, no one cared that he wore a crown, and strangely, neither did he. Back in the capital, the changes reached even farther. Twice each week, Darian rode to the palace for council meetings. The first decree shocked every minister. From today forward, he announced, every servant has the right to speak during council, if their work concerns the matter being discussed. The chamber erupted in disbelief. One noble protested immediately. Your Majesty, servants are not advisors. No, Darian agreed. But they often know more than the people pretending to advise me. The room fell silent. His second decree dismissed 3 senior ministers, including Lady Marissa Thornbrook's father. Their crime wasn't theft or treason. It was something Darian now considered just as dangerous: arrogance. You taught this council to mistake pride for wisdom, he said. That ends today. Word of the reform spread quickly. When the news reached the mountain valley, Celine said nothing. She simply continued grinding herbs in her garden. Mrs. Willow noticed. "You're listening." "I am. But you're pretending not to." Celine smiled faintly. "I learned a long time ago not to trust promises." The older woman nodded. "So you're watching actions instead?" "Yes." Autumn slowly turned toward winter. Darian never missed a single visit to the village school. He repaired the roof before the first snowfall. When a landslide blocked the eastern road, he spent 2 days digging beside ordinary laborers until the path reopened. Not because anyone was watching, because it needed to be done. One snowy evening, Celine walked home carrying a basket of herbs. She stopped outside the school. Through the frosted window, she saw Darian kneeling beside a little boy struggling to read, patiently sounding out each word, smiling every time the child got one right. There was no audience, no applause, no political advantage, just a man quietly giving his time. Mrs. Willow stepped beside her. "You still haven't forgiven him." Celine watched Darian laugh as the boy proudly finished the page. "No, but," she hesitated, "I don't have to wonder anymore whether he's changing." The old woman smiled knowingly. "Because?" Celine looked through the window one last time. "His actions are finally arriving before his promises." At that very moment, a sharp pain tightened across her stomach. She froze. Another pain followed, stronger this time. The basket slipped from her hands. "Darian," she whispered, "I think our daughters are coming." "Darian." The basket of herbs hit the snowy ground. Celine pressed a hand against her stomach as another contraction stole her breath. Mrs. Willow caught her before she could fall. "The babies," the older woman gasped. "It's time." Inside the schoolhouse, Darian looked up at the sound of hurried footsteps. One of the children burst through the doorway. "Mr. Darian, Miss Celine needs you." He was already running before the boy finished speaking. When he reached the road, he found Celine leaning against Mrs. Willow, her face pale but calm. Another contraction tightened across her body. Darian was beside her instantly. "I'm here." She looked into his eyes. This time, she didn't see the distant Alpha King who had once dismissed her. She saw the man who had spent months earning back the right to stand beside her. "They're impatient," she whispered through a strained smile. He managed a shaky laugh. "They already sound like their mother." Mrs. Willow pointed toward her cottage. "Move, both of you." The little mountain home became a whirlwind of activity. Water boiled over the fire. Fresh blankets were warmed. The village healer arrived with 2 young assistants. Darian was ordered out of the room almost immediately. "You're pacing holes into my floor," the healer scolded. "I'm trying to help." "You're frightening the father-to-be." "I am the father." "Exactly." The healer shoved him toward the kitchen. "So be useful." For the next several hours, Darian carried water, chopped firewood, and obeyed every instruction without complaint. Whenever Celine cried out, his hands clenched helplessly. Mrs. Willow finally pushed a mug of tea into his hands. "You look worse than she does." "I feel worse." "No, you don't." He couldn't argue with that. Just before dawn, a baby's cry echoed through the cottage. Then another. Darian stopped breathing. The healer opened the bedroom door, smiling. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. You have 2 healthy daughters." His legs nearly gave out. He entered the room slowly. Celine rested against the pillows, exhausted but smiling. One tiny bundle slept peacefully in each arm. She looked more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Come meet them," she whispered. Darian knelt beside the bed. His hands trembled as Celine carefully placed one baby into his arms. The little girl yawned, wrapped her tiny fingers around one of his, and refused to let go. A tear slipped down his cheek. "She's so small." Celine smiled. She already has you wrapped around her finger. I think they both do. The second baby stirred. Darian leaned closer. I missed the first months of your lives, he whispered to his daughters. I'll never miss another day. The weeks that followed passed in sleepless nights and quiet joys. Darian learned how to rock 2 crying babies at once. He changed nappies with increasing confidence, though Mrs. Willow insisted he still tied them crooked. The villagers often laughed as the Alpha King hurried through the square carrying bottles of warm milk instead of royal decrees. One snowy afternoon, Celine watched him walking with both daughters asleep against his shoulders. She realized something had changed. He wasn't helping because he wanted forgiveness. He was simply being their father. Months later, as spring returned to the mountains, Darian approached Celine while the twins slept beneath an apple tree. The council wishes to welcome you home. Celine looked at their daughters, then at the valley they loved. Finally, she met his eyes. I'll visit. She smiled gently. But whether I stay will depend on whether the kingdom has truly changed. A year after Celine had walked out of the great hall, she walked back in. This time, she wasn't alone. One daughter rested on her hip, the other clung happily to Darian's hand as he guided her through the enormous doors. The same nobles who had witnessed Celine's humiliation rose to their feet. Many lowered their eyes in shame. Others watched in silence, remembering the night they had laughed instead of speaking. The great hall looked exactly as it had a year ago. The long council table, the banners of every allied pack, the Alpha throne standing beneath the carved image of the moon goddess. Only one thing had changed: the people. Darian stepped forward before anyone could announce him. There will be no council today. His voice echoed through the chamber. There is something more important. He turned toward Celine. A murmur spread through the crowd as the Alpha King slowly descended from the throne. Instead of stopping beside it, he walked to the exact place where Celine had stood on the night he had called her useless. Then, he knelt. Gasps filled the hall. No Alpha King in living memory had ever knelt before another person inside the great hall. Darian lifted his head. His voice was steady. A year ago, I spoke words no husband should ever say. He looked directly at the gathered nobles, and many of you remained silent. No one argued. No one could. I believed leadership meant always having the answers. He smiled sadly. The truth was, I had stopped listening to the person who carried this kingdom beside me. He turned back to Celine. You were never useless. You were the quiet strength behind every village that survived winter, every peace agreement, every child who received food before hunger reached their door. He glanced toward the 2 little girls watching curiously from Mrs. Willow's arms. I almost taught my daughters that love could exist without respect. His voice caught. I thank the moon goddess every day that they will never grow up believing that. An attendant stepped forward, carrying a velvet cushion. Upon it rested the Luna crown, the same crown Celine had left behind in the palace. Darian picked it up. Several nobles expected him to place it upon her head. He didn't. Instead, he held it out in both hands. When you left, I thought I had lost my Luna. He smiled gently. I finally understand that I had first lost the right to stand beside her. The hall remained utterly silent. This crown belongs to no king. It belongs to the woman worthy of wearing it. He lowered his hands. When you're ready, you decide. No commands, no expectations, no pressure, only a choice. Celine looked at the crown, then at the people gathered around her. She saw ministers who had apologized, servants now seated along the council walls with the right to speak, village representatives invited into meetings for the first time in the kingdom's history. She saw change, not perfection, but change. Slowly, she accepted the crown. She held it for a long moment, then, with quiet confidence, placed it on her own head. The great hall erupted into thunderous applause, not because the kingdom had regained its Luna, but because, at last, its Luna had been given the freedom to choose. 5 years later, the great hall was full once more, but this time, there were no raised voices, no mocking laughter, no frightened silence. At the center of the council table sat Alpha King Darian Blackwood. The seat beside him remained empty. The ministers waited patiently. No one spoke. A young noble leaned toward Captain Rowan and whispered, "Why hasn't the meeting started?" Rowan smiled. "Because we're still waiting for our Luna." Almost on cue, the great doors swung open. Celine entered with 2 little girls racing ahead of her. "Slow down," she called, laughing. The twins ignored her completely. Lyra reached the throne first and proudly climbed into her father's lap. Her sister, Liana, scrambled onto the chair beside him. "I'm helping with the meeting today," Lyra declared. "So am I," Liana added. The council burst into warm laughter. Darian kissed the top of each daughter's head. "I suppose that means we'll receive twice as many opinions today. And twice as many good ideas," Celine replied as she took her seat beside him. Only then did Darian turn to the council. "We may begin." It had become an unbreakable rule throughout the kingdom. No council meeting started until the Luna was present. Not because tradition demanded it, because respect did. After the meeting ended, the twins wandered through the now quiet hall, their small hands trailing along the carved wooden table. Lyra looked up at her father. "Papa?" "Yes?" "Mrs. Willow told us everyone talks about this room." "They do." "Why?" Darian was silent for a moment. Then he lifted both girls onto the edge of the council table. "Because I once made the biggest mistake of my life here." Liana tilted her head. "What mistake?" He glanced at Celine. She gave him a gentle nod. "I forgot to listen." The girls frowned. "That's all?" He smiled sadly. "It was enough. I thought being king meant speaking louder than everyone else. But your mother taught me something far more important." Lyra leaned closer. "What?" Darian reached for Celine's hand. "The strongest leader isn't the first person to speak. He is the first person willing to listen." The twins looked at their mother. "Is that true?" Celine smiled. "It is. And do you know something else?" "What?" "Walking away wasn't the hardest thing I ever did." The girls blinked. "What was?" She looked lovingly at their father. "Believing people can truly change." Liana wrapped her arms around both of them. "I'm glad you believed." "So am I," Lyra agreed. Outside the palace windows, the kingdom flourished. Village representatives now sat beside nobles in council. Servants spoke without fear. Every child, regardless of birth, attended school. Every winter village received supplies before the first snow, not because one king had become wiser overnight, but because one Luna had refused to remain where she was not respected. The kingdom remembered the night an Alpha King called his Luna useless. History remembered something greater. A woman who quietly walked away, instead of begging to be valued. A king who spent the rest of his life proving that love without respect is not love at all. And 2 little girls who grew up knowing that the greatest strength any leader can possess is the courage to listen before they speak.